Welcome from the Music City Center, Nashville, Tennessee. We're here at the EMS World Expo, the largest EMS dedicated event in the world. This is EMS World Presents Stories from Expo. Your story continues here.
Hello, I'm Aaron Gutzman with EMS Garage and EMS World Podcast. We have kind of come together as one in Nashville, Tennessee at EMS World Expo. And I am with, what is your name?
Olson.
Curtis Olson.
Nice to meet you.
I should probably introduce myself.
That's okay, you did.
And Curtis is here. You have a poster presentation?
No, lecture tomorrow morning.
A lecture on how to stay awake during the night shift. That's not a problem I have, because I haven't worked nights in a long time, thankfully.
You're very lucky.
But it's caffeine, right? Just caffeine.
Caffeine and other things too. In addition to working in healthcare before, I got my degree in healthcare. Before I became a paramedic, before I became a nurse, I had an English Lit degree, which was a huge open door for me to work in a couple of coffee shops. So I'm very passionate about coffee. I talk a lot about coffee in the lecture I'll be doing tomorrow.
Sure.
Another thing that I use quite a bit, not quite a bit, but a fair amount, is a medication called modafinil. It's a medication for narcoleptics. People who have sleep apnea, people who are maybe are taking opioids that are appropriately prescribed for them, but get sedated from them. So I use that not on every night shift, but when I haven't had a chance to take a nap before going into a night shift, I'll take that. And it isn't a speedy amphetamine kind of awake, not that I know about amphetamine awake, but I know about too much coffee awake. It isn't that. It is just this very 4 o'clock in the morning, wow, I'm awake kind of awake. And I use it also when I drive long distances. I live in Nebraska. In Nebraska, a lot of drives are long distances. So I'll take that and don't get that nod off at the wheel between going from Lincoln on the east side of the state to Scotts Bluff, way 300 miles on the other side of the state. So it's very effective and I use it, I like to think appropriate, probably maybe once every other week, and it gets me through the tough times. But coffee is the mainstay.
Sure. Now, obviously, this is something you wouldn't recommend, say, oh, no need for sleep, just pop a pill every night shift and work 6 in a row.
I have a whole other lecture I won't be giving at this conference about how to get proper rest. And about every third weekend, I do Friday, Saturday, Sunday, work a night shift, 7P to 7A. Then I have what I call the speed sleeping. I got to get proper amount of sleep between that 7A and then 7P when I got to go back in. So that is a whole other ball of wax. But your body needs sleep, your brain needs sleep for performance. If you're awake for more than 24 hours at a time, you're basically, your judgment, your motor skills, all those sorts of reaction times are all the same as being the equivalent of working impaired, and that's improper too. So you got to get through the night, but you got to get proper rest between those shifts.
So, is there more to it? I mean, is there system problems that can be changed to help their providers? Well, let's say maybe you're not allowed to go from day shift to night shift to day shift, or.
Currently, I work in an ER. I'm an ER nurse, so I work overnight, 7P to 7A. I was on the fire department for a year. That was 24s. I couldn't tolerate that. I had to leave and went back to school. And the main reason I couldn't tolerate it is I couldn't rest between calls at night. So I'm sitting there in the bunk room, and everyone else has sleep apnea. Everyone else everyone else has no problem relaxing between calls. I was, brand new probie, new paramedic. I was just like nervous. I was like, when's the next call going to come? So I couldn't get the rest I really needed on those 24s. So that's why I went to nursing. Initially out of nursing school, I was in a regional burn center. For that, we did 2 weeks of days, of 12-hour days, and 2 weeks of 12-hour nights. That was just a recipe for disaster too. I got through a year of that, but just barely. So now I'm straight nights, 3 nights a week, and I can tolerate that.
Yeah.
And I still have to get entrained with my family when I'm off, because they're on a day shift. But the 24s is difficult if you don't have the ability to do it. I didn't have that talent of sleeping right away, but a lot of other people in the department did.
All right. Yeah, it's not a problem I have, thankfully. But so would you say, obviously there are nighttime people.
Yes,
I would say
absolutely.
there's as good or as big a group or as high a percentage of as there are night people. There are people that are kind of forced to work nights as new probational or nights and days as probational EMTs
Yeah.
or paramedics.
Or just to make the money, they got to work those 24s, and they're
Yeah,
up
the
to all
24s
24 doing transport, your routine transports and things like that. And we've seen how
Okay.
that leads to a lot of motor vehicle crashes and injured medics and injured patients.
So what not to do? Then what's the dangers of working days and nights and getting tired, and what are some things you should definitely stay away from if you're working a night shift? Obviously alcohol. But
Yeah. And then even on those rest times, a lot of these sleep medications, prescription medications, or alcohol or Benadryl don't give you that really good REM sleep you really need to recover. You need to train your body. When I do that lecture, I talk about it being kind of like training for an athletic event. When you see Michael Phelps getting ready to swim a 200 freestyle, he's sitting there and he's got his headphones on, and you can see him swimming that whole race in his head. And that's what you got to do when you're preparing to go to sleep between those shifts. You got to prepare yourself, you got to prepare your space, you got to turn the lights down, turn that thermostat down, tell the family to get the heck out, turn off the phone, turn off the doorbell, all that kind of stuff. And prepare mentally for, I am going to sleep, I'm going to have good rest. So if you don't, then you're really headed for disaster. It's very well documented. If you don't get that sufficient rest, your mental abilities goes down, your reaction times, your empathy, your compassion, all that gets stressed, and your performance goes way, way down. So get that rest and then be able to work through your shift. And then we aren't just our jobs. We have to go home. We have to deal with families, the laundry, the dishes, all that kind of stuff. And then also just driving home. If you've worked a 12-hour overnight, that puts you at a huge risk for a crash on the way home. I'm lucky I have just a 15-minute commute, but I have some of my coworkers who drive like an hour to come in, and one of them, they put their speakerphone on, and their husband talks them in all the way home. And that is the only way you do it. Or you can do podcasts maybe. My commute is too short for podcasts, but that keeps you engaged. There's some kind of music when I'm driving.
Yeah.
I don't typically put in a CD. I'll put on the radio and I'll switch between stations, and that keeps me engaged in driving ideally, but also engaged in what I'm listening to. Do I like that? Do I not like that? It's like, oh, that's country. Not a big fan of country.
Certainly a good tip for when you're driving home. Probably not one you can put into practice, driving code 3 to a call.
No,
but,
yeah, well, you're engaged with the radio definitely, but
Yeah.
it's not the radio. Not looking for progressive rock rather than
Yeah.
than staying away from the country.
Oh, perfect.
So I'm very passionate about coffee. So when I do my lecture tomorrow, I'll talk about very specific ways you can make really good coffee. Would you like to hear about that?
I will. I'll definitely attend tomorrow. I don't know if
Okay.
we have time for the intricacies of it
Okay.
here, but I do think that that's just as important, because there are a lot of paramedics who just think that the Folgers and half a scoop is enough.
Yeah.
But
I have a high tolerance for bad coffee, but I do really enjoy a good cup of good coffee, and that delivers a caffeine boost. And caffeine, I'll talk about in my lecture, is basically a medication. And like any medication, it's got effects, it's got side effects. You learn how to titrate it correctly. So when you have a 12-hour shift and you work until 7 a.m., you don't have a double cappuccino at 5, because that's going to hang with you there for 6 hours.
yeah, that's an interesting. Well, because you say you sometimes you take a medication. You said the name of it, and
Modafinil, yeah.
people might be taken aback at first, like, oh.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you say that, I mean, if critical care paramedics or work with NICU teams, caffeine is absolutely a medication
Yeah.
that you're familiar with.
It has a half-life, it has side effects, and you get addicted to it, literally. So when I'm taking that modafinil to stay awake, I use that, and that keeps you awake. But I have to drink coffee, because if I don't, I will get headaches, I'll get a little nauseous, because it's caffeine withdrawal.
And my wife too, yeah.
So you get dependent on it, and I will happily admit I'm a caffeine addict, or at least caffeine dependent. And if I don't get that caffeine, I will get headaches, I'll get with the shakes, I'll get withdrawal symptoms, and you get that. It's got to the point where sometimes if I was very careful with my caffeine intake, so I didn't have it before I go to sleep, I'll wake up in the mid-afternoon and I'll have a headache, and that is headache from caffeine withdrawal. So to help me go back to sleep, I have to have just half a cup of coffee. That gets rid of the headache, and I can go back to sleep.
Well, well, I'm glad I have the opposite problem. If I have a cup of coffee, I'm up. I used to be able to do that, but so how to stay awake on the night shift? You're giving a lecture tomorrow. This will be published probably after that. So,
okay.
But if anybody had like any questions or wanted to contact you or get a transcript of your speech, do you have a work email that you can?
Yeah. It's Curtis Olson RN. So it's CURTISOLSON RN, registered nurse @gmail.com.
All right, perfect. And this is the EMS Garage Podcast with EMS World Podcast here in Nashville. I'm Aaron Gutzman, and click on the videos and peruse the site for more information on EMS World Expo topics.
Okay, stay awake and work safe.